The Michigan Man Podcast, episode 193. The Wolverines are on top of the Big Ten standings with 4 games left, and Team 135 is on the practice field with plenty of work to do. That and more on this week's show. This is the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. How sweet it was Sunday at Crisler as Michigan took down Sparty in a thriller 79-70, and yes, moved into sole possession of first place in the Big Ten. Yes, there are 4 games left to play, and none of them will be easy. But a win like Sunday's should give this young Michigan team the confidence they need to finish strong. On today's Michigan Game Day segment, Wolverine beat writer Rod Beard from the Detroit News will join us to recap Sunday's great win and talk about why this Michigan team has been so surprisingly good this season. Team 135 kicked off spring practice yesterday. We all know this is an important spring for Michigan football, and the man calling the shots, Coach Brady Hoke. There is so much work to be done during the 15 allotted practices, and so many questions that need to be answered. It is no exaggeration to say this is the most important spring session in Brady Hoke's Michigan coaching career. This season must be better, and the cold hard facts are that the toughest tests will all be on the road. Pressure? You better believe it. But when it's the 4th year of your program, you have to expect positive results are what Michigan fans expect, and I think Brady gets that too. On our Michigan Gameday Extra, football beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive will be with me to preview Team 135 and talk about what needs to be accomplished and what questions need to be answered this spring. When Trey Burke and Tim Hardaway said so long after last year's memorable season, we thanked them for a great ride, the likes of which we hadn't experienced for more than a decade as Michigan basketball fans. Even with those 2 leaving, we still had plenty to be excited about this season, tempered by the reality that this was still a very young team, and seasons like last year's don't come along that often. When this season started, we waited for Mitch McGary to feel better. Then we learned that wasn't going to happen. Mitch opted for back surgery, and the 2013-2014 Wolverines continued without him, growing and meshing by the week before our very eyes. I think we all wondered at times if this would be a season of youth and rebuilding, because we couldn't expect that this team could possibly contend in the Big Ten without the big man. Wrong we were, and happily so. Here we are again in late February, sitting on top of the Big Ten heap. Yes, it's a half-game lead right now, and there are 4 very tough games left to play. But still, it's been another exhilarating winter watching this young group exceed expectations. And who knows what thrills they have left for us as we approach March and the big dance. Coming up next, Michigan basketball beat writer Rod Beard from the Detroit News joins me on this week's Michigan Game Day, here on the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. Here with us on Michigan Game Day to talk about that big victory over Michigan State on Sunday, Michigan basketball beat writer Rod Beard from the Detroit News. Welcome back, Rod.
Always a pleasure. It's great to be back after a big win, too. It's good to talk about Michigan after beating Michigan State especially. It's probably the best week of the year for Michigan fans.
Looking back on it, though, Rod, probably too early to say the Big Ten championship was decided with that game. Way too early. We have 4 more games coming up in the next 2 weeks. But Michigan sure took a big step on Sunday in that direction, didn't they?
Right. I think it's people want to talk so much about closing the gap or being even with, and I think to do that, Michigan needs to win at least one solo Big Ten title by itself, not the tie a couple of years ago with Ohio State and Michigan State. If you win one, those are the two teams you probably don't want to tie with because those might be your two biggest rivals. But to win one outright this year would take a big step in that direction. And getting that win over Michigan State, it's only a half-game lead. There's still a lot that Michigan needs to do. But that's the big step, is getting over that last hurdle. And the 4 games left are favorable. Well, that's the first I'll go, at least, in calling it. They're out there and they're able to win it, is that it's favorable because you don't have a game against one of the top 5 teams left in the Big Ten. So if you handle your business, you should be able to get it in these last 4.
Well, Rod, let's take a couple of minutes to talk about the big win Sunday against the Spartans. Michigan's Big 3, all on the same page Sunday. We haven't seen that happen a lot this year. Talk about Caris LeVert and his just outstanding first-half play in which he pretty much put the team on his back.
Yeah, there was a stretch there right before halftime where I think he scored 9 of the last 11 or 8 of the last 10 points. And it's what we've seen before where Stauskas has had some trouble offensively getting off and getting into a good rhythm. Caris LeVert really carried them in, and that three-pointer right before halftime was really the exclamation point on that, where it looked like it could be a double-digit lead going in. He hit that three-pointer to answer their basket on the other end with 1 second left, and that cut it down to a 2-point deficit at halftime. And I think that was the message going into halftime, is that Michigan didn't play the half that it wanted to, but it was only a 2-point lead that Michigan State had, and they had the confidence going in after that made basket. He's really been maybe the most improved player in the Big Ten, definitely, but I would say maybe even in the country. You can start that conversation too. And the issue with Michigan was not so much the Big 3 and how they were going to contribute. It was figuring out the pecking order of that Big 3. So many people had Glenn Robinson III being that second scorer in that loop. Maybe it was Caris LeVert all along that was the second scorer, and sometimes can be the primary guy. And now that I think they've gotten that pecking order set, they know where the ball is going to go and who they need to get it to.
Oh, there's no question. Caris is the biggest surprise for Michigan fans this year. You're right. He might be the most improved player in the country. He is just so tough to defend because he can take you to the hole or he can just stop and pop.
Yeah, he's got a nice hesitation move, and he's got these long arms, the rangy arms, with that dribble that he can keep it away from you if you're trying to reach around and grab it from him. And just when he gets in the lane, he's so wiry, and he looks flexible, like he's almost not even made out of bone and flesh, that he's some kind of plastic or some kind of something that he's made out of, that he's able to get into those angles and make the moves that he does. But he gets into these little crevices and makes room for himself, room enough to get there and to finish at the rim. And the stuff that he did over the summer with the strength and conditioning coach, John Sanderson, has really paid off with that bulk, has helped him to absorb some of that punishment and have some body control when he gets in there. Last year, maybe he looked a little bit more frail, and you weren't sure how much of that contact he could take and absorb and be able to last through a game. But we saw yesterday that they can make it into the second half and feel comfortable about where they are.
Well, in the second half, it was like a switch flipped for Stauskas. He went from passer to aggressor. And when he's in that zone, as we've seen so many times, he is very tough to defend, isn't he?
Yeah, and he had probably one of the quotes of the year for me when he said he realized that he was being contained, and he just decided he wasn't going to be contained anymore. And that's what people have been looking for, both from him and from Glenn Robinson III, is that mentality of, I've got a talent level that's much higher than anybody else on that other team, and I'm just going to impose my will offensively. And I think that was a watershed moment for him and possibly for Michigan this year. If you're just going to decide that no one can guard you and you're going to decide that you're going to make baskets and get to the rim, that's what's going to make a transcendent team. I think that's what we saw in Trey Burke last year too, was that, hey, you know what, I'm just better. I'm not going to settle for this shot. I'm not going to settle for losing this game or being passive in this situation, and they're just going to go after these things. And I think it's what people have been looking for all year from both of them, but Stauskas definitely verbalized that and showed it on the court as well, that he was going to go and get his, and he did that in the big win.
And not to take anything away from Nick, but one thing that I noticed, Caris had the big first half, then State came out in the second half and decided no more of that. They're gonna move Gary Harris over on LeVert, and that created a mismatch with Appling on Stauskas, which helped him have a big day.
Right, and that's one of the staples of the Beeline offense is we're going to put 4 shooters out there on you, and you can't guard them all. And you need to have 2 guys that are hitting on the same day, and preferably that third guy to really spread a defense out where you can't help, you can't leave this guy, you can't cheat on defense. And this was the third time this year that Stauskas and LeVert had 20 points in the same game. And guess what? Michigan has won all three of those games. So I think that's starting to show that when you can get both of those guys going in the same game, and Beeline hit it too. Some of the problem was in some of those offensive sets, you've got them on the same side of the floor so people can cheat over on defense. Well, if you put them on separate sides, you got to pick your poison. And in those two stretches, LeVert at the end of the first half, and then Stauskas and LeVert combining on that 21-4 run where Michigan was able to pull away, you have the formula. You've got what you need, the elixir that's going to help you to win games like that. And so this bodes well for Michigan that they seem to have found something in the adjustments that they're going to make offensively to make teams have to pick. And even a Gary Harris and a weakened Keith Affleck nonetheless, but still, you're going to make teams have to decide who they're going to guard.
Well, another mix in that elixir Sunday was an engaged and aggressive Glenn Robinson III, the third dimension to that attack Sunday. When he plays that way, it more than adds another dimension to the offense, doesn't it?
Right, and I think where he's found where he fits in as well is that maybe he's not that aggressive first or second option, but just like we saw from Stauskas last year and just like we saw from Robinson as well, when he's that third option, when those two can break down the offense and get him the ball in a space where he can be aggressive with it, that makes him a better player. So, again, with that pecking order, maybe figuring out that we don't need Robinson to be that jump shooter, we don't need him to be a primary scorer, we just need him to be the residual guy who can pick up once these other two guys break down the defense, then I think that might be a better role for him. And if that continues, I think Michigan can make a nice little run here in the postseason, figuring out that, hey, LeVert maybe is our second guy, and we don't have to depend as much on Robinson. On a game-in and game-out basis, maybe that's what we'll go to, but maybe we can go to Robinson just every once in a while and not depend on him the same way, and that takes a little bit of pressure off him, and maybe he plays better in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I thought another huge key in this game was the way John Horford and Jordan Morgan played Adrian Payne. They were aggressive with him, physical, did a great job of making him work, and he looked tired in the second half, didn't he?
Yeah, they just really leaned on him a little bit and made him work for the shots that he had. And Tom Izzo admitted that maybe he played Adrian Payne too many minutes in a row, and he really got gassed, and they couldn't figure out when they wanted to get him out and what they were going to do with that. But it's just being solid for Horford and Morgan. And again, with McGarry out, you can't ask them to do too much, but they really balance off each other, and they don't hurt you. Horford fouled out, but he had played a really tough game, and he had helped to neutralize one of their better players. And I think the mentality for Michigan was, if Harris and Payne go for 35 or 40 points, that's fine, as long as we don't have anyone else that goes off for 15 or 20 points. And really helps to boost Michigan State's offense. And that's the game plan, and that seemed to work, is let Harris, let Payne get their points. Valentine had a good first half, but there was no one else outside of those two in the second half that really seemed to hurt Michigan at all.
No, and one of the keys, I think, moving forward in the final four games and in the tournament, we look at the obvious to see if Stauskas and LeVert are playing well and Glenn Robinson is getting more comfortable. But the play of Morgan and Horford together in the center, it's not as obvious, but it is so important to this team.
It's just one of those underrated things that you don't really see on the stat sheet. Like, you might look and you see Horford had 2 points and 3 or 4 boards, but as you pointed out, it's the defense on Payne and making sure that he doesn't get easy basket. He doesn't get that offensive rebound and that dunk that kills your momentum and then ignites that bench and gets them some momentum as well. So I think it's just one of those underrated things and underappreciated things that you don't really notice until you look back and you replay the game and you say, well, wow, what happened to Adrian Payne in the second half? He was tired. Well, okay, who kept him off the boards, though? Who boxed him out? Who did that little thing that goes unnoticed sometimes? And both of those guys have really done a great job of that. And again, you're talking about Mitch McGarry being out, and Jordan Morgan, a guy 2 years ago who was the starter, who's creeping up on being one of the career leaders in games played and possibly even wins. He's in the top couple of guys of Michigan players in career wins. Those are significant things, and he's just not a bump on a log. He's a significant contributor, and once you get your top 2 or 3 guys going, who benefits from a lot of that residual penetration and breaking down the defense? It's Jordan Morgan on an offensive rebound, or it's on a pick-and-roll play. Those are solid guys that you've got to pay attention to.
Well, another guy you've got to pay attention to is Derek Walton Jr. And some fans might call that game Sunday a quiet one, but no turnovers. I don't think he had any turnovers. Paced the offense extremely well, played great D. He has such a calm demeanor for a freshman, doesn't he?
Absolutely, and that's what they were looking for out of him is not to come in and to be Trey Burke, but just to come in and be solid. There's some games where he might come in and score 15 or 20 points, and but just don't turn the ball over. Michigan had 3 turnovers in that game, and Beeline kind of lamented those 3, but said, well, hey, the number over the last 9 games have been 9 turnovers, and that's a good number for most teams. You'd probably lead the nation if you only had 9 turnovers a game. But from the way that Michigan is set up, with not having a lot of big guys, they don't create turnovers themselves, so they have to really value their possessions and be efficient. Derek Walton does that. Earlier in the year, he was learning on the fly. He turned the ball over maybe a little bit too much. He didn't have as many assists. But now that he's settled into that role, he's learned how to break down the defense, how to find guys in their sweet spots, and get them the ball where they want it. And that's been one of the differences in Michigan's turnaround this year, is that they're more solid at that position. He's grown into that position.
And the other thing about that position is when he needs a break, you bring in Spike Albrecht, and he comes off the bench in the first half, nails a big 3. He doesn't have a lot of minutes, but that 3 fueled a 10-0 run, had a couple of assists, no turnovers. He's had, 2 turnovers, I think, in his career, or this year they were mentioning yesterday on the telecast. It is just such a luxury to have him as an asset coming off the bench, isn't it?
I think for both of those guys at point guard, they know where their bread is buttered. They know when they need to be aggressive and when they need to hit a shot. And I think Walton's three-point percentage is something ungodly too, in the 40s in Big Ten season so far, of hitting three-pointers. And it's just the timeliness of them. When the ball rotates back to them, they're in position, they're ready to take that shot, and you feel comfortable when that shot releases that it's going to go in because they're confident and they're stepping into it, and they've got all the technique and everything right. So I think that position, again, underrated, because you look at the gaping hole that was left with Trey Burke leaving last year, and you say, well, hey, there's no way any one of them can live up to that type of legacy, but it's also just be solid. Don't hurt us with turnovers. Don't hurt us with bad shots and not getting us in the offense. And those are just a few of the things that those guys do. And again, it's the pecking order and recognizing what your role is. Don't try to step outside your role. The same way that you perform in practice and the same things you do in practice, do those things in the game and everybody will be fine.
Well, it was such a big win for the program. Of course, puts Michigan in first place in the Big Ten with 4 to go. Coach John Beilein said after the game, this is what he is working for as far as building the program. He mentioned that Ohio State, Wisconsin, Michigan State, they have kids in that program that expect to be in the tournament every year. They don't know anything else, and he wants the Michigan program to be the same. It is making great strides in that direction, isn't it, Rod?
Yeah, and I think that's the key. And when people want to talk about the closing the gap with some of the stalwart teams in the Big Ten, that's what it's about. It's winning a Big Ten title here, making an NCAA tournament run last year, and creating a culture at home where people are afraid to come in. They know what the record is. And I think, 44-4 now at home in the last 3 years, where they're going to win most of those games at Crisler Center, and they're going to go on the road as they did this year. They can take one at Wisconsin. They can win at the Breslin Center. They can go to Ohio State and get a win. That's what's going to make you a consistent winning team, is losing 1 or 2 at home maybe in a season and then going on the road and being above 500. And those are the building blocks and the foundation of a good program. And John Beilein understands that. Now, it's taken him a few years to implement those things. But now he's at a point where when he goes to a recruit and says, hey, if you're thinking about coming to Michigan, look at what we've done in the past 4 years. We've made the NCAA tournament. We've got a Big Ten championship. We've got a Final Four in there. There aren't very many coaches in the Big Ten that have that same resume over that short span, the last 4 or 5 years. And I think that's why he's able to get the recruits that he wants, that fit into his system, and he doesn't have to take a chance on a guy that really doesn't fit. He's got good character kids and good performing kids who buy into it, and you can see by Karis LeVert and a Nick Stauskas just the improvement that they make from year to year. A Jordan Morgan, who was maybe people talk about 3-star or 4-star, 5-star guys. Jordan Morgan was maybe a 2-star recruit. No one else wanted to give him a Division I scholarship to play at this level. And look how functional he is within this offense and this defense, being a Big Ten defensive all-defensive team player a couple years ago. So you can see what Beeline does to develop players and how he's kind of constructed this program and the foundation of it around what the key tenets that he wants it to be are.
Well, this week, Rod, no time to let up. Purdue on Wednesday, and Purdue is a young team. They have plenty of talent. They've struggled for consistency as of late, but the game's at their place, and Michigan needs to come off of that big win Sunday and bring it right out of the gate.
They've got to play the same way they played for most of their road games this year. I mentioned the wins at Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Ohio State. They've got to play with that same mentality, like there is no lead. This half game, Michigan State doesn't have a game, so we'll know after that Purdue game where exactly Michigan sits, whether it's one game up or whether they happen to lose and they're falling back into a tie with Michigan State. And there is no tiebreaker. Though Michigan has swept the series this year, if the two teams have the same record at the end and they're tied, then it's a shared title, just like we saw a couple years ago. The only tiebreaker would be in terms of seeding for the Big Ten tournament. But that's why it's important. You can't look at these last 4 games, although they're favorable for Michigan to win them all. You can't look at them as gimmies. And people talk about trap games and the mentality going through. Do you start looking ahead to one game or another game? Beeline does a good job of keeping everyone focused on one game at a time. Here's Purdue. They're playing at home. That's a tough win to try to go in and get. Matt Painter really coaches up his kids, and you have more talent on paper, but you don't play games on paper. You have to go in and handle your business and treat it as a business trip, get your work done, and then move on to the next game after that. After everything's all said and done, then you can celebrate if you happen to win, but don't start counting any chickens or putting eggs in baskets or anything like that, because a team can step up and bite you, and then you could be in a position where you're kind of in jeopardy. So use a little bit of margin, use the confidence that you gain from it, but don't start feeling like any of this is done yet, even with 4 games left. Good advice, and another big week for Michigan basketball. Our guest on the show today has been Michigan basketball beat writer Rod Beard from the Detroit News. Rod, as always, it's a pleasure, and we'll get you back here in a couple of weeks. No, not a problem. Look forward to it. Team 135 is on the practice field, and they have a lot of work to do in preparation for the upcoming season. Coming up next on our Michigan Gameday Extra segment, we'll be joined by football beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive and talk about what needs to be accomplished this spring. Here on the Michigan Man podcast on GBMW Go Blue, Michigan Wolverine. With us on our Michigan Gameday Extra today, football beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive. Great to have you back talking football, Nick. Always good to be with you, Mike. Well, it seemed like the season just ended yesterday, but we're almost 2 months past the end of the season in the bowl game. Practice underway started on Tuesday, so we've got Nick on to talk about what we do know about spring practice and some of the very important things about these next few weeks. Nick, let's start with Jake Butt's ACL injury. It was a major blow to the team when it was announced. And I know it's complicated and it's unclear right now, but from your perspective, what does this injury mean to the team and to how they'd like to use Devin Funchess?
Yeah, the latter part there is, to me, was kind of the first thing I thought of, outside of, obviously thinking of, what this does to Jake Butt, and, you wonder, and you hope for his sake that he's able to, respond and come back from this. And usually kids are these days. ACL has become, it's still a serious injury, but it's become more common. So, hopefully for his sake, his recovery is fine. But you look forward to the this season, and you say, okay, well, going into it, you seemed like you were set up pretty good because Jake Butt looked like he was, the guy that could play every down at tight end for you if you needed him to. He could stay in and block and probably catch passes and do all those things, which meant that Funchess could then probably play exclusively at wide receiver, which, they never really totally committed to in the first place, but it seemed like that's where that was probably headed. Now, with Butt being gone, you wonder, does Funchess have to split his time? Does he have to play more at tight end? And if he does, that means that you're already looking for at least 2 more receivers to step forward. Now you probably need 3 more to step forward if you do that. If you don't do that, are you just going to go ahead and ride with A.J. Williams or Jordan Passport's got, A.J. Williams has, I think, 1 catch for 1 yard and a touchdown, and that's it. Passport has never made a catch. Khalid Hill has never played. And Ian Bunting will be a freshman that enrolls in August. So, after Jake Butt, your tight end position really isn't, I don't want to say it's thin because there's enough bodies there, but as far as the quality depth, there really isn't any. So this is a very interesting situation, and spring ball here this week and the week, so it'll be interesting to see how they handle it.
Is there any thought, and I don't know where I read this in the last week or so, about maybe moving Wyatt Shulman into the tight end competition?
Yeah, I think that was, he was mentioned as an H-back. In the new Nussmeier offense, the fullback won't really be as much of a priority. I think that the H-back, which is basically like, kind of a slash tight end slash fullback type person, he was mentioned in that group when Nussmeier got here, and then I think the natural thought was maybe Wyatt Shulman could do this. I don't think they've never come out and said he'll be a tight end. Brady hasn't talked actually since Jake tore his ACL, so he hasn't come out and said that yet. But that seems like something that they were inclined to do it for added depth. That seems like a guy who could handle it from his skill set and his size and everything else. Shulman was a pretty versatile kid in high school. I know he played defensive line. There's a lot of people that thought he should have played defensive line when he got here. So he's a pretty versatile athlete, so it wouldn't surprise me if he shows up there at some point.
And what is he, Nick, in the 250, 260 range right now?
Yeah, somewhere in there, maybe 240, high 240s, somewhere in the 250s. Okay. I think he's tall enough, so I think size-wise he'd be able to do it. But I don't know if you'd want to. I think you'd want to let your other tight end see first see if they can do something, see if Hill can do something, see if Williams can take the next step, and then if they can't, maybe you say, okay, well maybe we need to push Shulman over there and maybe help him out. But I think that would maybe be a latter case scenario, but maybe not. We'll see what happens. There's always shuffling in spring, and that could be one of those spots.
Well, Nick, whichever way the staff goes with Funchess, it's a big spring for the receiving core, and the good news is there's a lot of young talent there. Just listen to these receivers: Jehu Chesson, Amara Darbo back from injury, Drake Harrison, Freddie Canteen. Those are 2 true freshmen. Jaron Dukes, Demario Jones, Casante York. A lot of talent. They just have to step up and compete now.
Yeah, not a shortage of bodies, which was the problem, a couple of years ago where they just didn't have any bodies there. They've taken care of that in recruiting the last 2 years. Jones didn't redshirt last year. Dukes and York did. And they let those guys kind of wait and learn and grow, I guess, in the redshirt roles. And obviously, Amar Darbo was a guy who they thought would be probably a starter. They had him penciled in to be their starter opposite Gamelin when the season began, and then obviously he hurt his foot before the year even started and was lost for the season. So Darbo will be limited in practice, and the rest of those young guys, Harris and Canteen, who are already here included, are going to have a chance to step up and do something. And someone, or someones, I should say, are going to have to do it. Offensive line to me is the most crucial, position group right now in the spring that they need to work on. But wide receiver is a pretty close second in my mind, because you have to come out of the spring with somebody other than Funchess as a guy who can catch passes for you. You lose Jeremy Gallen, and that was just a huge blow. Jeremy was so consistent for so long here. And that's fine. He's gone, but somebody has to step forward and replace him, and somebody has to be consistent with it. And we're going to have to see some growth, from 1 or probably 2 of those young receivers. Doesn't really matter who it is. It's just 2 of those guys that have got to step up and become reliable, so they have options. Because right now, the only option, proven-wise, is Funchess and maybe Chesson to a degree, but not even really the consistent level. So very interesting to see how that pans out, and it'll be one to watch.
Well, along with developing a number 2, number 3 option behind Funchess from that group we've just talked about, we also need to develop a real slot receiver, and it sounds like Dennis Norfleet and Justice Hayes are going to do battle for that, doesn't it?
Yeah, the Hayes thing was something Brady talked about a lot in this, in the bowl practice. That maybe they move Justice over there in the spring. I think he'll probably get a look at it. I think they probably want Norfleet to be able to be comfortable enough to play there because he's so dangerous. And Hope also talked about Freddie Canteen competing in the slot. Canteen is a slot guy. That's how they envisioned him. He's 6'1", 6 foot, something like that. But I guess he's Brady says his route running is the thing that separates him, and his kind of ability to find spaces and defenses and stuff that, you want your slot guys to do. So, I think that those 3 guys will probably, fight for time there. And again, yeah, somebody's going to have to step forward. the slot receiver in Al Borges' offense wasn't really a huge deal, but it seemed like it came up at big moments. It seemed like whenever Drew Dilio made a catch, it was a big catch. You know what I mean? So there's definitely, and I don't know how Doug Nussmeier will use it, but maybe it's different with him. So we'll have to wait and see how they use the slot going forward. But I still think there is an absolute hole there, and really more than anything with Norfleet individually, they need to get something from him. They need to make him comfortable at some spot to get some production out of him other than just returning kicks, because he's just too good of an athlete to just be kind of wasted as just a kick returner, and that's it. I mean, it seems like he can do some other things for you, and you need to find out a way to get him on the field more consistently.
Well, Nick, job number one this spring has to be the offensive line. I don't think anyone would argue that. Chris Bryant out for the season, news that broke last week, just too bad for Chris. Magnuson will miss spring recovering from shoulder surgery, but everyone else is good to go. So this is a competition you would hope you would see 5 possible starters identified coming out of spring, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think that's the goal. But even then, I wonder if that still is something that lingers. I mean, if a couple guys come out and just grab the position by the throat, which is what you would want, you obviously ride with them in the fall and you have a good idea of who you're starting with, because you have to have a starting point. You have to at some point let guys start to mesh together. But for the first week or so of this thing, I would expect it to be about as wide open or as clean a slate as you can possibly get, because if we're being honest, there isn't one guy on that offensive line that did enough last season to earn the right to just absolutely start without anybody pushing him coming into this year. So, your normal candidates, Glasgow will probably start out as the starting center. He was the only guy that actually started every game that's returning, a year ago. So, that seems obvious. Kalis and Bosch will probably start out as the starting guards. That seems obvious. And then the tackles will be interesting because, like you said, Eric Magnuson's going to miss most of spring, if not all of it. Definitely the live portions of it as he recovers from a shoulder. You would think that Magnuson will probably be a starter given all the time he played, but who reps at tackle this spring? It looks like Ben Braden and probably David Dawson and Logan Tully-Tillman. So any of those 3 guys are going to have a chance to fight for playing time. And I know Hoke really, really likes David Dawson. He really likes David Dawson, not only as a possible tackle, but more also as a guard. I think that's his normal position, or that was what they projected him as. But they think he can do both. So big chance for a lot of guys in a crucial time. And this offensive line, you can't say enough. They have to click. This has to work, or it's trouble for everybody. I mean, this is the thing that's, in my mind, this is what's standing between them, with success and failure, basically, is this offensive line.
And just a note on Chris Bryant, he has suffered through a series of surgeries and injuries during his Michigan career. The good news is he's going to be around the program, as Coach Hoke said, and a part of it the remainder of his time in Ann Arbor.
Tough break for him. Obviously, Chris was a very good kid. We talked to him a few times last year. It hurts every time you hear this about somebody who fights as hard as he does to try to get back. I know he had the leg injury a couple years ago, and then he had the shoulder that nagged him. He was never 100%. I think Chris Bryant came in here as a pretty highly regarded kid. They were excited about him, I think, when he was a true freshman. They were excited about him the next year, but the injuries just never got out of the way. And tough news for him. Probably a tough decision, but it's always nice to hear that he'll stay around and be a part of the program. Sounds like he'll have a chance to get his degree, which is more important anyway. So good for him that he's staying around, and he'll still be a part of the program, and hopefully he'll finish out his career and get the college degree.
Well, Nick, Derek Green and Devion Smith both got their feet wet last season. They both, I should say, had bursts that we could see, wow, there's something there. But much more is going to be expected from them this spring. It's going to be a good competition, and throw Drake Johnson into that. It should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, another one that's wide open. A lot of them on offense seem to be pretty open. And in the running back spot, the other part I'm interested too with the new offense with Nussmeier is there an opportunity? And I would assume there probably is. Is there an opportunity for both of those guys, for Smith and for Green, and maybe even Drake if he gets healthy enough? Mainly for Smith and Green, is there enough opportunity for both those guys to have featured roles in this offense? And I would think that there is. I never figured out or understood, Al Borges's desire to only have one guy, and even Al went away from that toward the end of last season. But it seemed like that was always kind of the thing. We want one guy. We want one guy to be the guy, and whatever happens after that, we don't really care about. So that never made sense to me. I think if you look at football today, you look at the NFL, you look at even college, the beating you take as a running back, I think you have to have 2. and you have to have two that are able to carry the load if one person gets slowed up or whatever it might be. So I think that the exciting part for Michigan has to be, are you able to get Derek Green and Davion Smith together to buy into all this, to push each other, to make each other better? And if you're Michigan, you're hoping that if you're able to do that, you end up with basically a two-headed, running back tandem who is pretty darn good. You don't need to have, if you have two, that's not that big of a deal. I mean, to me, I think that's the interesting part here, and I think both those guys are similar runners. They can pound the ball, they can run downhill. But again, they have to be in shape, they have to be motivated, they have to buy in, and they have to be ready to take that next step in all phases of the game.
And when you watched Nussmeier at Alabama, and prior to that, that sort of fits right into what he likes to do. He likes to roll with a couple of backs and maybe even just run with the hot back at times.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from his time at Alabama was if there's talent on the team, he's going to play it. We saw up close and personal when Michigan played Alabama in 2012. Eddie Lacy and T.J. Yeldon both got 15, 16 carries, and they both went over 100 yards. Or whatever it was. I mean, if there's talent out there, those are two NFL backs. There's no reason to sit one just because you want to run with one guy and keep the momentum in there. If there's talent on the field and that talent has earned the right to play, it'll play. And I think that's the biggest part. It shouldn't just be, well, this is how the depth chart works, so we want to do just with one guy or whatever. You have to get everybody on the field. You recruit all these kids. You were 7-6 last year. Anything you can do to win games, you're going to have to do it. And I think that they're going to need all hands on deck when it comes to the running game. And I think that the fact that you do have two guys who are young who got their feet wet is important. And now, they probably come into camp now a little different too. They see that the opportunity is there. They're not going to have to fight over a senior. So that's got to be probably motivating for them, and that's probably good for the whole team.
Our guest here on our Michigan Gameday Extra segment as we discuss spring practice, which got underway on Tuesday, is football beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive. Well, Nick, we don't have a quarterback controversy this spring, but we do have competition. Coach Hoke said so himself. Devin is going to be limited. We don't know what that means. We'll have to watch that in the next couple of weeks. So Shane Morris and Russell Bellamy will get a ton of reps, which is good for them, isn't it?
Absolutely, and even Wilton State will get some reps too, being in here in the spring. But it's good for both those guys, especially Shane and Russell, because he didn't really get much last year either. But and this to me will make the competition a little bit more interesting. And obviously you look at this and he says, well, we're not really sure who the starter will be. We were 7-6, basically saying Devin's going to have to come back and earn the job, which is totally fair and understandable. But at the same time, I think that Shane Morris earned, in my mind, he earned the right to have a chance here. He earned the right to compete and be involved in this, and not just be a guy who comes into the season and holds the clipboard and waits his turn quietly on the side. I think he earned the right by preparing the way he did in December, all of December, to play in that bowl game. And I know some people have said he wasn't that impressive in the bowl game, or they didn't think he was that great in the bowl game. I must be on the other side of that, because I was very impressed with the way he played in that game. I was impressed with his arm. I was impressed with his poise, his feet. He did what they needed, what they asked him to do. The game plan was pretty vanilla, but I think he executed it the way they wanted him to. So I think he's earned the right to do this, earned the right to compete. And any snaps he gets, any added reps he gets is only a good thing for him. And it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see if or how much Devin can do, or if he can do anything at all. And it'll be interesting to see what Shane looks like at the end of the spring, because if he looks good at the end of the spring and Devin hasn't done anything all spring, then fall's going to be interesting. It's not going to be just something where Devin walks in and it's his job. He's going to have to fight for it. And I think that's a good thing for Devin. It's a good thing for Shane. I think it's a good thing for everybody.
Well, I know Devin is limited, and again, we're just not sure what that means. He just started running a week or so ago, so that was basically 3 months without working out. But it does sound like the staff is going to be disappointed if his reps don't increase at some point this spring, aren't they?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because he did just start running a couple weeks ago, but spring practice is a 5-week-long thing, so. If he misses the first week or so, or a couple of weeks just to get back into shape, and all of that, that's one thing. But I think you want, if you're Michigan, to have Devin doing something live related, or 80% even by the end of spring, because he has to have hands-on time with Doug Nussmeier in this offense, and he has to have it now. I think that's, if you miss all that and he just has to stay on the sideline and watch, you're going to miss out on a lot. As far as the development goes, as far as the teaching goes, because if you want to fix some of the issues that he has to be out there to have, Doug Nussmeier fix them. That's why he was brought in, right? He was brought in to run the offense and help these quarterbacks, and you can't help them if Devin can't play. So, I think that they would be a little disappointed if Devin can't do anything in the spring. So it still remains to be seen what he can and can't do, but he is running, which is a good thing. There's no cast or boot or anything else anymore. So looks like he's closer to playing than not, which if you're Michigan, that's a good thing.
Well, Nick, in January, Brady said he wasn't certain who his starting quarterback would be this spring, which raised a few eyebrows. Do we have a real quarterback competition on our hands, or do you think maybe Brady is trying to really light a fire under Devin?
I think it's probably more of a fire-lighting thing, under Devin than it is a real competition. But I don't want to just totally discount it either. There are some people that don't buy it at all, and they're saying, it's just coach speak. I don't really want to discount that completely. I think that you have a situation here where not only does, first and foremost, Devin needs a push. And I think that that's fair and that's understandable. Last year he came into this with no one competing with him. And it was his first year as a full-time starter. And, everybody kind of looked at it and treated him like he was a guy that's been a 3-year starter that just, he was coming back to have the job, and that was that. He needed someone there to push him along and make him better every day in practice, and he didn't have it because Shane Morris was obviously learning, Russell Delaney was hurt, and you didn't have any other scholarship quarterbacks. So, he needs a push to get better, I think. And also, Michigan needs to make sure that it has the best player on the field, because if you're going into games and you still turn the ball over and you're still throwing interceptions, and you look great one minute and you look terrible the next, and you're costing games, you can't have that. This is too important of a year. It's too crucial of a year for Brady Hoke, for the whole staff, for everybody else, to just give the job to somebody because he had it last year. I think that across the board, that philosophy cannot exist. You can't just go into it and say, well, he played last year, he has more experience, it should be his job. If he gets beat out, he gets beat out. That's how it should be, and I think that's how it will be for the most part going forward. Now, that doesn't mean that I think Shane Morris is going to start over Devin. I think Devin has a better chance of winning that job, but, if for some reason he doesn't, get it done, then, Shane Morris should start. I mean, that's how this should work, because you have to do whatever you feel is best to win, and that's just how this should go. That's where they've reached. That's the point they've reached in this program right now under Hoke. They're not winning enough games. They need to do whatever they have to do to win, and I think that's kind of a message he's sending right now.
Well, Nick, do you think we're going to come out of spring practice with a better feel for what Doug Nussmeier wants to do with this offense, the direction he's going to take it?
Yeah, I think we'll have an idea of the look of it, how it'll look. I think that from what I can gather, the fundamental philosophies of it all won't be any different or much different than what they were under Al Borges, or what they said they would be under Al Borges. So we never really knew. That was the one frustrating thing, I think, for fans and for us when we would talk to Al. They would say one thing and they would end up doing another on game day. So a lot of times it didn't make much sense. But I think we'll get a better idea of, what this offense will look like, kind of personnel-wise, if things are different or maybe certain things they do differently. But I really think until we see it in a game, until we see Doug Nussmeier call a game, I should say, we won't really have a great idea of how this will work, because, practice and preparation and development and everything else, that's all great and that's all important. But you still have to do things on Saturdays, and you have to make plays, and your coaches have to make, the right calls, and they have to put you in position to win games. And, we saw Al Borges call a couple of fantastic games while he was at Michigan. We saw him call a couple really, really bad ones. So, it remains to be seen how that all works, but I think we won't really know until that first game what Doug Nussmeier does and how, kind of his tendencies and all that sort of thing. But we should get a small idea of it, but I think we'll still have to wait and see until August.
Well, Nick, it's also a big spring for the defense. We know we have a very talented and pretty darn deep linebacking core. The news heading into spring, which maybe surprised a lot of us at first, but the more you think of it, it sounds like a good move. Jake Ryan going to the middle. Pretty interesting stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it is a good move. I think that it makes sense, especially the way that Hoke kind of described it. He said that, I think the Ohio State game was maybe the eye-opener for them in a lot of these spread-out formations when Ryan is spread out away from the field. Basically if the offense is dictating that, they're trying to get him away from action and run away from him. If that's happening, he's not going to be involved in plays just because it's not coming near him. I think they feel if he's in the middle of the defense, he's closer to the ball, he's closer to the play, and he can make more plays. And that makes sense to me. I think, Jake Ryan has the size to play middle linebacker. And not that Desmond Morgan I thought Desmond Morgan was a very good, inside linebacker I think he has been for his entire career, for that matter, and I think Desmond Morgan will continue to play. I think he can probably play outside too. But, Jake Ryan's the best playmaker they have athletically. and probably the best, well, we don't know, Jabril Peppers, maybe he's, but I mean, as far as guys that are coming back, he's the best guy they have, so it makes sense to me to get him closer to the ball. And I still think we'll see Jake probably playing outside, too. I think whatever they can do to keep him on the field almost every snap, I bet they'll do.
Well, there's a ton of work to do on the defense, too, especially in the secondary and in the trenches. And last week, Coach Hoke did a little shuffling with his defensive staff, and that's probably not a bad thing, is it?
No, I think it was needed, I think, from a couple of different levels. I think you look at the defensive backfield, they struggled there last year. Kurt Miller was coaching, all groups by himself. I think the idea of, Brady said he talked with his brother, John, who coaches defensive backs for the Bears, and he kind of, came away from that conversation and talking with some other people as well in the NFL about, more and more in the NFL these days, you see cornerback coaches and safety coaches. They split up the responsibilities back there because it's such a difficult position. And they're different jobs. I mean, corners and safeties have different jobs. So that made sense to me. It also made sense to me to not have multiple player coaches at your linebacker spot right now because, like we said, linebacker is the deepest position you have with the most talent. It would seem to me it needs the least amount of work. And then the other part of it, too, and maybe the most important part, was you needed somebody just focused on the defensive line. I think we saw that last year. Mark Smith has been a defensive line coach before, I think 15, 16 years, something like that in his past. Getting him in there to be the sole voice or the consistent voice in that room is important for that group because last year, they didn't have one. They had Brady Hoke coaching the tackles and Greg Madison coaching the ends, and both those guys obviously have other things to do as well, which leads to the last point here is that Brady Hoke needs to run the program, right? He needs to be involved in everything, and by him having to take time out of his week last year every week, more time than people probably realize to go over individual tapes and drills with just defensive tackles and not spend the time that he needs to spend, on every other aspect of that team, you're taking away. I've seen coaches do this before where they try to do the position coach thing and be the head coach, and it rarely works because you just have too much to do as a head coach. So I think this frees him up to do, more things, to be more involved with the offense, which I think needs to happen, and to be more involved with just the general game plan and everything else and not be bogged down with jobs that assistants should be doing.
Well, Nick, one of my listeners emailed me the other day, asked me a question about spring practice that kind of stumped me, so let me throw this at you. Mm-hmm. We started practice on February 25th, and the spring game is in April, early in April. This is a very early start to spring practice. You get 15 practices in pads, so the practices are really spread out. My listener wanted to know, in between those practices, does the coaching staff, are they able to meet with the players, do film sessions, coaching sessions off the field, or is it just limited to those 15 practices?
Don't quote me on this, but I believe you're allowed hourly, during your spring session, you're allowed, just like you would be during a regular season. I don't think the hours are the same, but you're allowed certain hours to work with the guys, and I think that can be split up in any number of ways. You get the 15 pad practices, but I think you also have hours that you can fill with film or whatever it might be, or individual stuff throughout the week. So I think that the NCAA allows you to have this spring practice session. During those weeks, you're allowed, I believe, to have hours that meet up. I don't think it's just limited to the spring practice, and that's it. Obviously, there's film involved and everything else. And then, again, a lot of that stuff is, guys are going to have to do that on their own, too. I mean, they have to come in and watch film on their own, and those are not countable hours. So, that sort of thing. They are allowed. It's a practice session, so they are allowed to be in there and do more things than just practice. Though it's not as much, obviously, as you're allowed to do in the fall, but it's still there, and it's still something, which is obviously better than nothing.
Well, Nick, we've seen the move of Jake Ryan to the inside. We have a quarterback competition, a lot of competition on the offensive line. It is a very important spring. I think it's safe to say this is the most important spring for Coach Brady Hoke since he was named head coach, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think so. I think that's fair to say. It's time for a lot of different guys to start clicking. It's time for you look up and down the roster on both sides of the ball, and it just seems like there's, a huge number of players that you look at and you say, okay, he needs to turn now. He needs to go into a different level, or he needs to make that jump, whatever it is. And every year, you look at any team, and there's always, 10, 11 guys that you say that about. But this year, it seems like there's numbers in the 20s. There's just so many guys that if they do make the step, the coaching staff feels they can make, then the team will be fine. But if they don't, they're going to really struggle because this is, in some ways, in a lot of ways, this team's even younger than it was a year ago. So guys have to start turning the page or turning the corner, so to speak, growing up, and that's the big part of this spring. It's a big grow-up spring for Michigan, and it's one that has a little more pressure on it now because you went 7-6 after you went 8-5, and now you got to start winning games again. And so a lot of pressure for these guys to make it work, a lot of pressure for the staff to make it work, and a lot of pressure for everybody to make it work right now. And that starts in the spring. So yeah, absolutely. This is the biggest. This is the biggest year of the Birdie Hope tenure, so it makes sense this would be the biggest spring, and that all starts right now.
Amen to that. Our guest on our Michigan Game Day Extra today has been Michigan football beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive, and of course, spring practice just started yesterday, February the 25th. So who knows what's going to happen in the next few weeks? But we'll keep our ears tuned for any news, and Nick will get you back on later at the end of spring practice. But as always, we appreciate your time and look forward to the next time.
No problem. Thank you, Mike.
The latest news from the Wolverine athletic scene is coming up next on Wolverine Quick Hits, as we wrap it up for another week here on the Michigan Man podcast on GBMW. Go Blue, Michigan Wolverine. On Wolverine Quick Hits today, Nick Stauskas has been named the Big Ten Player of the Week for the third time this season, as announced Monday by the conference office. In Michigan's only game of the week, Stauskas used a game-high 25 points to lead the Wolverines to a 79-70 victory over Michigan State at Crisler Center and a season sweep of the intrastate rival. He shot 9 for 13 from the field, including a 3 for 5 performance from long range, and was 4 for 6 from the free throw line. Stauskas added 5 assists and 3 boards and did not commit a foul in 37 minutes of action. So congratulations to the Big Ten Player of the Week, Nick Stauskas. The 10th-ranked University of Michigan hockey team defeated Penn State by a score of 5-2 to split the weekend series on Saturday night in front of another sellout crowd at Yost Ice Arena. Freshman forward Alex Kyle and junior forward Phil DiGiuseppe supplied 2 goals apiece, and sophomore goaltender Steve Racine stopped 18 of 20 shots in his 10th appearance between the pipes this season and first at home since October 10th against Boston College. The Wolverines return to action this Friday when they face off against Big Ten rival Ohio State at Yost Ice Arena. The puck is set to drop at 6:30 p.m., and the game will be televised on the Big Ten Network. Again, Michigan ranked number 10 heading into this week's action, with an overall record of 15-10-3, 7-6-1 in the Big Ten. The University of Michigan women's basketball team erased a 16-point second-half deficit and took a 3-point lead with 4:09 left, but Iowa scored 11 of the final 15 points in the game for a 74-70 win on Saturday afternoon at Crisler Center. Senior forward Val Driscoll scored a career-best 18 points on 8 for 8 shooting from the floor and grabbed 6 boards. Junior guard Shannon Smith scored 15 points and had 3 steals, with junior guard Nicole Elmblad chipping in 13 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 steals. Michigan shot 50.8%, 31 of 61 from the floor, and out-rebounded the Hawkeyes 32-20. The Wolverines wrap up the regular season this Saturday at Penn State. Tip-off is set for 3:30 p.m., and the game can be seen on the Big Ten Network. Michigan 17-11 heading into this week's play, 8-7 in the Big Ten. Freshman pitcher Megan Betza of the number 7 ranked University of Michigan softball team tossed a 1-0 complete game shutout against Florida Atlantic Sunday, extending the scoreless inning streak thrown by U of M pitchers to 32. The Wolverines went 5-0 at the FAU Invitational, held at FAU Softball Stadium. The Maize and Blue has shut out its last 4 opponents, including back-to-back 1-0 wins against Kent State. The Wolverines return to the Diamond for a doubleheader against Nevada and UCLA this Friday at the Mayfair Tournament in Long Beach, California. First pitch against Nevada is scheduled for 2 p.m. Pacific Time. Michigan again ranked number 7 heading into this week's play with an overall record of 12-2, so another great start for Coach Carol Hutchins and her Wolverines. The University of Michigan baseball team took a 2-run lead into the 7th inning before a bases-clearing double gave Houston a 4-3 win on Sunday morning at Cougar Field in Houston. 4 of Michigan's 5 losses this season have been by 1 run, including all 3 this past weekend, with the other coming by 2 in 10 innings. The Wolverines held a 3-1 lead going into the 7th. Fifth-year senior Ben Ballantyne retired the first batter before Caleb Barker singled. Michigan brought in freshman Brent Adcock, who gave up a Texas League single to Jordan Stating and an infield single to Jacob Leuenberg. Sophomore Jake Balicki came in to take over for the Wolverines, and Fulmer doubled to left field for the Cougars' winning runs. Michigan opens the USA Baseball Irish Classic this Friday at North Carolina State. First pitch is scheduled for 3 p.m. at Doak Field in Raleigh, North Carolina. The Wolverines 1-5-1 heading into this week's action. Don't forget to become a member here at GBM Wolverine. Visit www.gbmwolverine.com today and sign up for your free membership. You can find news about Michigan football and basketball anywhere on the internet, but there are very few places where you can get the news and then share your thoughts with other Michigan fans about football, basketball, hockey, recruiting, and so much more. Visit www.gbmwolverine.com today and find out what you're missing. It's free. Again, thanks to our guests this week, Wolverine beat writer Rod Beard from the Detroit News and Michigan football beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive. A reminder that you can find our show app in the Android store at Amazon.com, the iTunes store, and the Windows 8 App Store. It's also easy to listen to the show by downloading 2 other free apps, Stitcher Radio On Demand or TuneIn Radio. Just Google either of them and do a search for the Michigan Man Podcast. You can set either app up for free weekly delivery of the show to your favorite device. As always, our phone lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. And as I say each week, I would love to hear from you, so give me a call. You can also email your thoughts or opinions to the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That will do it for this week's show. I'll be right back here next week with all of the latest news in Michigan athletics, and I hope you'll be here too. Thanks again for downloading and listening to this week's show. I appreciate your support. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for listening to the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. You can find us on the web at www.gbmwolverine.com. That's www.gbmwolverine.com. For audio posts or other fan feedback, please call our listener line at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Email fan feedback to the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan. The Michigan Man Podcast is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue.